The story of Sergey Fyodorovich Dolgushin, a legendary Soviet fighter pilot. He rose from a cadet at the Tula Aeroclub to a regimental commander. During the war, he flew the I-16, Yak-1, and LA-5, participating in battles near Stalingrad and at the Battle of Kursk. Sergey Fyodorovich is a hero of the Soviet Union, Major General of Aviation, recipient of the Order of Lenin, and 4 orders of the Red Banner. I was born on September 25, 1920, in the large village of Novopokrovskoye on the Krasny Oseter River, Bogoroditsky district, Tula region. When my father died in 1934, my mother and I were left alone. My brothers lived separately, and the full burden of worries fell on us. I started school in 1929. First, I attended a 4-grade rural school, and then I transferred to the city school in Bogoroditsk, where I had to walk 6 kilometers daily in any weather. By 1934, I had finished incomplete secondary school, received a certificate, and entered the 8th grade. Up to that point, I had studied quite well, but it was then that difficulties with my studies began. Soon, I became seriously ill with pneumonia, and doctors insisted on a break. I needed to regain my strength, so my studies were interrupted and I was unable to complete them. In 1936, my mother and I moved to Tula. There we found acquaintances who helped us settle into a private apartment. The landlord was Uncle Misha Kolikalov, a famous heat treater and temperer throughout Tula. We had to live modestly, but it was during this period that a new stage of my life began, which led me to my future life's work. In 1937, I entered the FZU of the Tula cartridge plant. I lived on 35 rubles a month then. My daily ration consisted of a kilogram of bread, 50 grams of sugar, and hot water. Nothing more. Thus began my studies at the factory and plant school, where I was assigned to train as a locksmith toolmaker. There were 36 people in our group, but after verification, 12, including me, were immediately transferred to the factory workshop. Each was assigned to a master, and I got Vasily Mikhailovich, a man with golden hands. Learning came easily to me, and within a few months I was taking exams for new ranks. First I got the 1st, then the 3rd, and soon the 5th. Earnings grew with qualifications. For first rank work, they paid 45 rubles, second, 90, and third, 145. At first it was only enough for the bare necessities, but later I could earn 450 rubles a month, and in the last months before being sent off, more than 1,000. This was huge money for that time. I even once sent my mother 500 rubles, to which she surprisingly asked in a letter if I was stealing. My mentor saw that I was coping and often entrusted me with orders, giving me the money. He taught me to work according to drawings, and such orders were paid much higher. Thanks to this, I became stronger, gained experience, and felt confident. Working in the workshop and the master's support helped me not only survive, but also become a true specialist. At that time, airplanes, biplanes, and monoplanes often flew over the fields where we lived and worked. We knew little about aviation yet, but one day we saw an I-16 fighter jet speeding low over the ground. Its swift appearance inspired me so much that the thought of the sky became stronger than anything else. On August 18, 1937, my friend and I came to the Tula Aeroclub, which was located at the Myasnoye airfield. Instructors were sitting at a table there. We approached and asked how to enroll. They replied that we first needed to undergo a medical examination. I passed it successfully, but my comrade did not. He had a poor vestibular system. So I began to study alone. Studies began with glider flights. First, the flights were with instructors, then solo. Gliders were launched using rubber harnesses, and the first minutes in the air seemed like a miracle. Later, we moved on to towing training. The glider was pulled by a rope behind a car, and when the necessary speed was reached, the rope was released and you flew on your own. Gradually, I mastered takeoffs, turns, landings, and felt confident in the sky. With each flight, the desire to become a real pilot grew stronger. It was then that I realized that my whole life should be connected with aviation. After gliders, we began to study the material part of U-2 aircraft. The training was serious. Aerodynamics, mathematics, Russian language, algebra, geometry. Almost all of us came to the Aeroclub with 7 grades of education, but that was not enough. We constantly had to catch up with the curriculum. My day was scheduled down to the minute. From 6 in the morning until noon, I worked at the factory, and by 2 o'clock, I had to be at the Aeroclub. The commute was long, from the factory entrance to the tram, then across the entire city to the Moscow railway station, and another kilometer on foot to the airfield. Sometimes I asked for a pass to leave the factory from the other side and shorten the route. In the evening, after classes, I would return home by 11 at night. There were two types of trams, soft and hard. A ride in a soft tram cost 20 kopecks, and in a hard one, 10. There was almost never enough money, so I waited for a hard tram, even in 25-degree frost, standing in thin shoes and light clothing. All my free time was spent on studying. I prepared assignments right on the tram while commuting. When flights began, working hours at the factory were reduced to 4 hours. At the Aeroclub, we studied until 10 in the evening. We were fed well. Before classes, we were given a large bun with cheese, sausage or butter, and a mug of cocoa or coffee. This seemed like a real feast after long days on a meager ration. The first flights on the U-2 were pure happiness. First with instructors, then more and more independently. We learned both theory and practice, preparing for more. I understood. Ahead was not just a hobby, but a real profession. This is where my path into aviation truly began. In 1938, I graduated from the Aeroclub. My instructor was Kononova, a strict and sharp woman. I made 24 flights, and one day after a joint flight, the flight commander Ivan Shcherbina said, "Fly solo." This moment was decisive. I managed it, and soon an order came. Selections were being held at the Kacha school. I made it to the exams at the last moment and showed everything I had learned. The senior lieutenant who tested me noted, "You will study at Kacha." In December 1938, we were gathered and sent to Crimea. First, all civilian belongings were taken. We were shorn, washed, and changed into uniforms. Thus began my real military life. The impressions were strong. Dining halls with white tablecloths, waitresses, a well-kept school territory, and nearby, the sea and cypresses. For village and factory boys, it was like a different life. The training was rigorous. Every day, theoretical classes, a strict grading system, red for excellent, green for good, blue for satisfactory, black for unsatisfactory, and very unsatisfactory. Grades were posted on a board in the barracks, and everyone saw the successes and failures of their comrades. I was once penalized with a failing grade in aerodynamics, but I soon retook it and received an excellent mark. Flights began in February 1939, first on the PO2, then on the UTI-4 and I-16. My height was only 154 inches, and I had to put wooden blocks under the pedals to reach them. The first flights were difficult. Sometimes the engine would seize, sometimes smoke would come from the exhaust pipes, but I managed and mastered the aircraft step by step. Each day began the same way. Reveille at 3:30, a run to the sea, swimming even in winter, then breakfast and flights. Physical training was extremely tough. Cross-country runs, forced marches of 15, 35, and even 50 kilometers with full gear. Parachute jumps, centrifuge training, swimming in stormy weather. All this hardened the body and character. So the training went. We gained skill, getting used to the loads and discipline. I felt that I was becoming a real military pilot. Life at the school followed a strict routine. Reveille at 3:30 a.m., mandatory run to the sea, swimming even in the cold, brushing teeth with seawater, and washing directly in the waves. After that, breakfast and classes. In the barracks, constant study at the airfield, flights and training. Sleep was short. We went to bed at 9 in the evening, but due to the noise of movie screenings and music in the park, we fell asleep late and still had to get up before dawn. Physical training was an integral part of the service. We ran cross-country, performed forced marches of 15, 35, and even 50 kilometers with full equipment. We jumped from towers into the sea from 3, 5, and 9 meters, learned to overcome stormy waves, and dive to the bottom to wait out a shockwave. All this hardened the body and taught endurance. The training was hard, but we were fed better than in civilian life. White bread, butter, cheese, cutlets or chops, tea. Before flights, we were always given a bun with cheese or sausage and a mug of cocoa. For those who knew hunger, this seemed like real wealth. Discipline in the barracks was strictest. Grades for each subject were posted on a board, and anyone could see the successes or lagging behind of others. Everyone was noted, both those who excelled and those who struggled. Attrition was continuous. Some left due to poor health, others were expelled for poor academic performance. Free time was rare. Sometimes on Sundays we went to the cinema at the House of the Red Army or swam in the sea. But mostly recreation consisted of lying on the shore, washing our overalls in the waves, and sunbathing until lunch. Unauthorized absences were almost non-existent. No time and no reason. Everything necessary was provided at the school, and there was no point in going outside the gates. So the days passed, in study, training, and flights. With each month, we became more and more not just cadets, but future combat pilots. In early March 1940, we completed the course. Before graduation, we were issued uniforms, boots, tunics, caps, and all necessary equipment. In the House of the Red Army, Voroshilov's order on rank conferment was read aloud. All of us were given the rank of junior lieutenant, and the most experienced in our group, Vasily Chernik, was made a lieutenant. At the graduation dinner, there was wine on the tables, and the superiors congratulated us and wished us to become real pilots. The next day, most of our comrades went to Ukraine, and 23 of us remained. We waited for an assignment order, and soon we were informed. We were going to Bobruisk. A new regiment was just being formed there. The journey took several days through Moscow and Minsk. Upon arrival, we were distributed among squadrons. I ended up in the 4th. We lived in a hotel at first, 6 people to a room. The floors were asphalt, the amenities modest. Later, conditions improved. But then we had to make do with what we had. The planes were on skis at the airfield, and flights took place regularly. Soon new I-16 fighters arrived with M62 and M63 engines. We assembled them ourselves from crates, together with the technicians. Each pilot quickly became attached to his aircraft, took care of it, and, together with the technician, monitored its condition. I had my own aircraft, number 16, and I, along with technician Antonov, looked after it, even performing minor repairs. Relations with the technical and service personnel were comradely. We understood that our lives depended on their work. I tried never to treat them condescendingly because the aircraft was a common cause. Discipline in the regiment remained strict. At the debriefing, the commander could passionately hit the cockpit with his fist so hard that the metal bent if the pilot landed poorly. But at the same time, we felt that we were on the right path, becoming real combat pilots. Thus began my service in the regiment, from March 1940 in Bobruisk. This was the beginning of a combat path that would soon lead to the most difficult trials. In 1940, a serious problem arose in aviation. The bushings in M63 engines began to rotate. This led to engine destruction and could end in disaster. The scandal reached Stalin himself, and a new design urgently needed to be tested. It was decided to involve not test pilots, but us, young, unmarried, impeccable in piloting and discipline. 10 people were selected from the regiment, including me. We were ordered to fly to Crimea, north of Simferopol, where new I-16s with modernized engines were assembled. The tests were led by Brigade Commander Turjansky, who was well-known and strict. His brother, an experienced test pilot with a missing eye, explained to us how best to behave in the air, what to pay attention to so as not to cause an accident. The tests were exhausting. We had to perform 170 aerobatic flights, pushing the engines to their limits. We monitored oil pressure and temperature, performed complex maneuvers, and tested the aircraft for strength. Any mistake could result in death. Once my oil pressure started to drop, I managed to land the aircraft, and it turned out that a seal had blown. The entire aircraft was covered in oil. Despite the difficult conditions we managed, every day we went on missions, performed maneuvers, and recorded the results. We knew that the fate of new aircraft and future battles depended on these tests. When the program was completed, we returned to Lida. We received no thanks, no awards, no bonuses. Test pilots received orders for such assignments, but we received nothing. But in our hearts, we knew that we had done a great deed. We had tested new engines that would soon go into production. After returning from Crimea, we continued our flights in the regiment. But soon an order came to transfer all pilots to barracks conditions, equating us with conscripts if our term of service had not yet been fully completed. This was a blow. Many had already started families, lived in apartments, and now everyone was returned to the barracks. In addition, the technical staff was sharply reduced. Where previously there were several mechanics per flight for the engine, armament, instruments, only one or two remained. We ourselves began to prepare the aircraft, substituting for technicians. After exhausting flights, we had to check every detail with the mechanics, clean the aircraft of dust and oil, and monitor the armament. All this fell on the shoulders of young officers, but there was no choice. Flights were constant. We mastered new aircraft, including the UT-1, a small, capricious machine that only those with a piloting technique rated no lower than good could fly. Make a mistake, and immediately a spin. We performed simulated aerial combat, training firing, sometimes getting so carried away that we descended too low and were reprimanded by the command. Life in the regiment was harsh, but comradely relations helped. The technicians simply called me Sergey, although by rank I was a junior lieutenant and he was a junior sergeant. We knew he prepares the machine and my life depends on his work. Therefore, respect and trust always came first. Among the pilots, there was a natural selection. Some showed excellent results, others floated like shit in an ice hole, as we used to say. Those who couldn't cope were not tolerated for long. Sooner or later they left, and those who persevered were gradually promoted. I was soon made a senior pilot, which meant not only a higher salary, but also greater responsibility. So went 1940. We flew from one airfield to another, lived in hotels and barracks, trained and gained experience. In the air, I felt more and more confident. The I-16 became obedient, almost like a toy. I understood that the real work for us was yet to come. In May 1941, our regiment flew from Lida to the Novy Dvor airfield in Belarus. It was a former estate with a park, a pond nearby, and a village. We set up a tent city, and the planes were placed right at the edge of the forest. Everything seemed calm around, but the tension in the air grew with each passing day. Already on May 10th, as soon as we arrived, a German Messerschmitt 109 flew over the airfield at low altitude. On the same day, a state of combat readiness was introduced. Communication with border posts worked constantly. We were informed of every border crossing. We took to the air, but firing was prohibited. We could only escort the intruder. The Germans teased us. They flew along the border and sometimes even entered our territory, knowing that we had no right to open fire. The summer of 1941 was particularly tense. We flew over all border airfields, checking their suitability for landings. In Brest and Grodno, we refueled and returned to our bases. In the air, we saw German planes more and more often. They demonstratively flew along the highway, and we took off and flew alongside them, unable to fire. It was like a game, but we understood that the game would soon end. Flights took place daily. We trained in formation, performed turns, combat turns, and learned to maintain formation even in the clouds. In the evening, we were exhausted, but in the morning we took to the air again. The equipment required constant care, and together with the mechanics, we cleaned and checked our machines late into the night. Life in the regiment continued as usual. Barracks life, short breaks, rare leaves of absence. We knew that war was close. Every flight along the border, every glance at German planes told us one thing. The day would soon come when we would have to shoot not at a cone in training, but at a living enemy. So passed the last weeks before the start of the war. We were young, but we already understood. Ahead were difficult trials and no one could stop them.